Are you staying around for us or are you leaving?
No, ma'am. Unless
You're
I'm needed,
leaving.
I'm a text away. You can let me know.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, you're live. Start your meeting.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Sweetwater Union High School District Audit and Finance Subcommittee. It is a subcommittee of the Board of Trustees, and we are calling our meeting to order today on July 20th, 2020 at 4 p.m. And we'll first stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'd all stand with me. Place your hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now we'll go through and each of us can introduce ourselves. I'll start with my fellow board member. If you'd like to go ahead, Mr. Solis.
Sure. Arturo Solis, Sweetwater School Board.
And what
Daniel
is
Gutowski,
there
Community
you go.
Rep.
And Jerome Torres, community member.
Carolina?
Carolina Zimmerman, staff.
Dr. Stockpile?
Jenny Salkel, Chief Financial Officer.
Dr. Geary?
Hello, everybody. Moises Aguirre, Acting Superintendent.
General Counsel? You're muted.
Someone always is. It's me. Jenny Carbuccia, General Counsel for the district.
Thank you. And we have our guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kevin Smith, and I'm a partner with Crow LLP.
Thank you. And also on this meeting is Mr. Scavarna. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Mark Scavarna, Fiscal Advisor, San Diego County Office of Ed. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. All right, so yeah, we'll get started and start with our agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Torres, a second by Mr. Gutowski. Would you, is there anybody in opposition to this agenda? If so, speak now. Otherwise, we'll just consider it approved and ready to go. So first, we'll have public communication on posted items. Ms. Zimmerman, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we do. We have a public comment from Mr. Marinovich.
Thank you.
Greetings. While gone and off the Bond Oversight Committee, there remains my commitment to provide positive thoughts to improve this district and point out where there are issues which deserve accountability. With respect to this busy and wide range agenda, I have the following comments. FCMAT audit. The comments to the County Superintendent Gothold were disappointing because of the largely general nature of the response and the lack of specificity on what measures you have already taken or plan to take to improve internal controls, record keeping, and revised policies to ensure that the documented bad behavior can never occur again. The response was a golden opportunity to show to the community you mean business by providing specifics. FCMAT audit response / Brown Act. I worked in a bureaucracy and would find it hard to believe there was not some quote unquote temperature taking on how to tone and detail the response to the. It is recognized that a 15-day response time is extremely short, but a special meeting should have been called before this letter was sent, especially because it had policy implications which deserve an open discussion. Such a meeting would have been an opportunity for a leader to emerge and say, quote unquote, no more business as usual. AB 1200 disclosures. Unless I missed it, I did not see in the agenda backup where the district specifically planned to address the issues which were missing from prior board correspondence, i.e. full disclosure of the impact of the collective bargaining agreements. The very prescriptive disclosure requirements are found in Appendix B, quote, disclosure of collective bargaining agreement document, unquote, in the FCMAT Fiscal Oversight Guide. Internal audit work plan. At first glance, this is a very positive development with several audit areas specifically related to the FCMAT audit findings, such as fiscal services journal entries and fiscal services budgeting. To emphasize my point above on the audit response, you should have included elements of this work plan into your FCMAT audit response. Fraud hotline. Studies have shown that internal quote-unquote whistleblowing type procedures are the most effective measure at disclosing waste, fraud, and abuse. The term fraud may be too restrictive. Perhaps an expanded waste and abuse function could be interjected or even further if there was formal, quote, employee suggestion program where employee generated cost savings or revenue enhancements could be rewarded, should be considered. It should be noted that none of the fraud filings were from central administrative staff. Audit, performance audit. It is recommended there be more engagement with the Bond Oversight Committee on developing the performance audit scope. Frankly, I was very disappointed in last year's performance audit because it did not provide nearly the type of process/efficiency improvement recommendations one would hope for in such an audit. Involving the Oversight Committee would be a first step in repairing the current frosty relationship between the CBOC and district. In closing, the main good news is CFO Salkeld and her staff are the foundation for a new Sweetwater. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Carolina. Are there any other public comments at this time?
No, there are not. Trustee.
All right. So we'll close the public comment and move on to our first agenda item, number C1. Dr. Salkeld, you have the floor.
Thank you, Trustee Hall. So as Carolina pulls the presentation, what we'll be sharing is providing background to the committee on what we presented to the board at the June 8th meeting, and also, because that was the public hearing, and then on June 22nd. One thing I'd like to preface this with is there has been a lot of change, even when we brought this forward in June, based on the governor's May revision. It was very much different than the information that was provided early on in January. So obviously, the COVID situation definitely changed the economics and the numbers at the state level that then were incorporated into the budget plan that as school districts we had to follow as our basis back in May and June. So I'm going to cover a couple of points and then highlight, as what was noted on the agenda, what we have ahead regarding the 45-day budget revision, and then also the upcoming AB 1200s. They're going to be coming to the board on July 27th. This has also been a lot of work with our labor partners regarding a few items that will have a positive impact to the budget. So we'll touch upon that. So I'd like to start with slide 9. This particular page, just to provides a little bit of context of how significant this shift was of where we were doing our budget planning. That's really what started our work collectively as a district, working with our schools, working with our departments back in January. So you could see that the governor at that point was looking to invest about $1.2 billion in addition to the prior year in the local control funding formula. That drastically shifted come May. We saw a reduction of about $6.5 billion because the state was then faced with about a $54 billion shortfall. And so you're going to see here in a little bit because it significantly impacted the revenues that were going to be allocated to schools, particularly Sweetwater, and then what has shifted since then in the final budget. So as you can see here, even the cost of living adjustment, which is a key factor into those revenue calculations, that was suspended. So where we had incorporated that early on in January, in the May timeframe, that it amounted to about $9 million difference. That was not incorporated at that point. And I can say at this point in the final budget, this amount was not included. So when the governor signed off on June 29th, there was not an inclusion of a cost of living adjustment. amount. So that was a reduction that we will see in the upcoming weeks when we finalize the 45-day. So I just wanted to share how significant of a change of that Prop 98, what school districts get from just that short period of time. And then what I'd like to do is jump to slide 29, because cash flows are going to become, as I had shared with the board and the public back in June, front and center in this upcoming year, because that is one key area. The governor had introduced back in May revised that because of the cash, the income taxes being deferred at the state level and the federal level from April 15th to July 15th, that had a trickle effect down to school districts because it's managing the cash piece of it. School districts, the June apportionment, what the district would have been entitled to back in June, we had to pivot rather quickly because those funds were deferred. They were delayed. So we didn't get, even though there's a revenue aspect of it, the cash that goes with it was just received just a few days ago. So we had to manage all of our obligations, whether it was payroll or vendor obligations. A large of an organization as we are, of about $500 million operating budget, we were cutting it very close at the end of the month, with, I can say, around like $500,000 to $600,000 going into the new month until we got this deferral that was paid by July 15th. So it puts a unique balancing process into the work that we do. And as I said, it's going to become front and center in this year because as the final budget was approved by the governor along with the state legislature as a means to restore revenues to the schools, the way in which the state can then balance their budget is by then not paying funds to the school districts, what's entitled. They defer that payment. What we saw back in May-June timeframe was we were looking at an August to May to June deferral. All of those payments that were due to school districts were going to be pushed to July. Since then, we've received, just as of about a week or two ago, clarity based on the final governor's budget, how that was balanced at the state. We're now, so that this graph has now been updated and will be included in our 45-day budget that we'll be bringing forward to the board on the 10th of August. We now see deferrals earlier on. We see deferrals starting in February of 2021, where about 45% of what the district gets from the state will be pushed until November. So we will not see that money until November. What the school district's entitled in the months of March, April, and May, we're going to see about 70% of what that amount would have been deferred to the months of October, September, and August. And then the month of June, just like what we experienced last month, all of June's payment is now 100% deferred to the month of July. So again, this is how very fluid the budgeting process is at the state level and then at the district level for school districts. So again, as you can see, that's already an update from what was presented back in June. So a lot of us going to have to implement. Fortunately, we've been putting a lot of practices in place as it relates to the FCMAT report over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years. Since the management team and I have come on board to address those controls, to really have a good handle on the cash and what is coming in and what's going out. So, and it'll also lead into some interfund borrowing, and we'll touch upon that in a bit. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time here because there's going to be a recurring theme here over the next year about cash, and it's attributed to what was in the budget. Then shifting from here, I'd like to go to then slide 36, Carolina. How we structured the presentation to the board at that time, because again, it goes back to all of our work starting in January. You know, we were going down a path. We did have a structural deficit that we needed to solve for. We also had an intent to restore the economic uncertainty balance of about $9 million. So what we did here is we took this in stages because, as I call it, the governor's May revise had some pretty draconian cuts. we wanted to reflect the work that's been collectively done from the board to leadership to staff and our labor partners together. At that point, before the May revise, our work was looking at, we were going to have about almost a $4 million fund balance. Again, it's a projected. It's also based on where we think our end of the year in June. That's that first column where it says estimated actuals, where we project the end of the year will end. Now, again, it's slightly above positive, 1.2. We're in the process right now of closing the books. So hopefully we're around that number, or even better yet, because anything that is better than that number, as you can see, carries over into that proposed budget and would definitely help our bottom line. So at this point, we weren't quite there, obviously, of solving everything in its entirety, but at least we were on the positive. We've been in that negative fund balance for some time, since 2017-18, so at least this was Sweetwater starting to turn that corner in that positive direction. The next slide, if you go to that, Carolina, is what we started to evaluate, knowing, because we had gone distance learning in May, mid-March, after the governor's executive order. And as things have also been very fluid in that area, and in terms of what's going in terms of COVID and the situation there, and getting guidance from public officials, the county and others, we started to evaluate. This is where our budget is. We reached out. This is not done in isolation. We worked with various different stakeholders within the district of looking at, will there be transportation? Will there be, some of the programs that we offer? What about sports? So we took that budget that was in that prior page, and we said, okay, we're going to make some adjustments, because we were building a budget as if it's, our normal practice, but nothing at this point is normal in that sense. So we did make some adjustments, as you can see here, of about $3.5 million. And again, this was in conversation with various labor groups as well, reflective of like that last item there of 1.6 million. So we took that adjustment of 3.5, and then Carolina, if you could go to the next slide. Those positive entries, then, as you can see, that first column will not change, because it's still 1.2, because that's how we anticipate 1920 to end. You can see that in column B, that now we were estimating about 7.2. And again, it's because of these moving pieces that we thought, let's reevaluate that. So still weren't close to that $9 million of an economic uncertainty of our fund balance, but that's where we were at that point. Then we layered in what was in the governor's May revise, because the guidance we received from the county and from other agencies was that's the best information we have at the time. That's how we are to proceed moving forward with our projections for our budget for 2021. So if you go to the next slide, Carolina, I think that's the one that has our LCFF calculator. So what I want to point out here is what you can see. This is the information we knew at the time in terms of revenues. If you look at the 2021 column, and it's highlighted there in green, that cell, the district, based on that calculation, was $355 million. That's in terms of revenue. When you compare where the district was for 1920, we were at 396. So we're almost looking at about a $41 million decrease in the revenues immediately. That had to be reflected, and you're going to see that on the next slide. And what it did to our overall operating bottom line, and how it basically depleted that work that we had done in the prior slides. And then when you kind of look back, because the local control funding formula went into effect at the time with Governor Brown and the legislature then, was in 2013-14. So we kind of started from that standpoint. And you look back, what was originally proposed by the governor, the dollars in 2021 were far less than what the district received in 2016-17. So again, there was a lot of work. We reached out to some of our local legislatures. I know that our board members reached out as well. So again, on a positive, where we're at today, FCMAT released this calculator this past week. We've been in conversations with the County Office of Ed over the last couple of days, as of even last Friday, we've been reviewing this updated calculator. And so at this point in time, I can say that that number is now 390 million. So again, that's going to be reflected in the upcoming update that we'll be bringing forward to the board in August. Again, but that's a positive, right? Much different place than where we were at just a few weeks ago based on the final governor's budget. So we'll be providing this updated schedule in that August 10th presentation. So I just want to put that in perspective, because that when we transition to the next slide, Carolina, if you can move to the next one, you're going to see how significant of an impact that was to the financials. If we can move to the, yeah. So you can see here now that change in revenue. So if you go to column B and line 5, so you can see just that change, 396 million to 355. So that's where it reflected that change. And then you can see how we were then reflecting a negative balance of $26 million. And that's what we had to present to the board. You know, knowing with, again, all those moving pieces at the state level, because we have to bring forward a budget to the board prior to even the state having a final budget. So soon after this was presented on the 22nd of June, the governor signed off on the budget on the 29th. So if we go to the next slide, then that particular impact shows our 3-year projections. So we have to show the budget year of 2021 and then 2 out-year projections based on that information. So as you can see in line 8, that it's that compounding effect. When you don't have the revenues there, that kind of starts to, you know, impact the out years. So it was pretty, again, going back to my keyword, I said draconian. You know, when we saw this originally, it was pretty significant. And then what it does to the bottom, those required reserves, you can see there that $9 million in that range for economic uncertainties and all the other set-asides that we have to have. So you can see that we were looking at about 42 million. So again, this is the work we're doing now. So I'm kind of just giving a little bit of some previews of what we're going to be moving forward to bringing to the board. But I wanted to cover these items to provide that context. So I think if we can then move forward, I think it's slide, we've done, what slide number is this one? We can move, I think, to 47. So again, coming back to that cash theme, we already, from an operating standpoint, the day-to-day needs, is just outside of even the challenges of the current budget, there's always a cycle of when cash receipts come in and cash receipts go out. So we have been working, this is now going to be our 2nd year, kind of where we were deviating away from our interfund borrowing. We have gone to the county treasurer to specifically get an advance, in essence, of property taxes. So we already had that in the plan. We've already we're working with the county office and with the county treasurer. So this item here that's noted for $30 million, we actually got that released just a few days ago. So that's a normal process, because at some point when we get through some of our key reports, now that we've had AB 139 completed, now once we get through the SEC item, at some point the district will need to go to the financial market if then this option is no longer available, because the county treasurer is doing this on a temporary basis for now based on their current policies and where the district's at. We will need to go to the short-term financial market, what's known as a TRANS, a tax revenue and anticipation note, for us to borrow for that short-term cash flow need. That is a normal practice. I mean, that is something that we have been setting up so that we'll be ready at that point in time. So we review these cash flows, everything that kind of demonstrates where we're at with the county office of ed and with the county treasurer. The next slide, what I'd like to go and show is now, as those deferrals that I mentioned earlier, and where now the team is spending quite a bit of time looking at the cash deferrals and where things are going to have to be updated in 2021 based on this latest information from the state, where we will have to go to other internal resources, because interfund borrowing, according to the Ed Code, as noted there on the bottom right, Ed Code 42603, you can go to other funds on a temporary basis, as long as it's for purposes of timing. So such as that deferral, what we shared here in June, we were projecting in July that we would need to go to Fund 25 and Fund 35 for those amounts there. We actually came in just a little bit less than anticipated. It was about $16 million that we needed between those two funds. And once we got that deferral this past week, we immediately paid those back. So that's the intent of interfund borrowing. It's timing, and these are out of our control. The state has imposed these type of deferrals, but as long as we have in our plan to immediately pay them back. Where it becomes an issue is if the district is structurally deficit spending, what transpired in 2017-18, then why we took 2 years, the district took 2 years to pay back Fund 49, we need to minimize that structural gap. And so, we've had conversations with the County Office of Ed because of these significant deferrals from the state. If there's an option for deferral exemptions, the state has mentioned that. But at this point, we would have to exhaust all of our resources, which means like the county treasury, which we're already utilizing, looking at all of our internal resources before we can move forward. So that would include our CFD fund that could be utilized. So there's going to be a lot evolving in this area, but I wanted to spend some time with the committee so that you're aware of that, because that's going to be a lot of discussion and a lot of us utilizing those resources for a limited time. And then what I'd like to do then is jump to slide 64, because this does highlight the fact that according, that it's towards the bottom, should be in red. There's still a lot of conversation. If you could scroll it just a little bit more. There's another sentence there. Yeah, thank you. There was a lot of conversation. I know that the state legislature is going to reconvene at the end of August because of those tax receipts coming in, the income tax receipts in July. The state, the Department of Finance, and others are going to possibly revisit that and what the impact is to the budget. I know we're also all collectively following any conversation at the federal level, because if there's anything that is an additional stimulus package, that would certainly help perhaps alleviate some of those cash deferrals at the state level if we get any of those funds there. So there's still a lot of moving pieces from now until first interim. What we'll be bringing forward to the board, at least by early August, are things that we're aware of, which is, the cost, the LCFF calculator, any other new revenue sources. There's also the CARES Act, which is one of the stimulus act monies. But now too, with deferrals being key, there's probably gonna be additional costs that we need to post that we didn't have in the original budget. So there's a couple of things we need to address. The other part, as I mentioned early on, was we've been having a lot of conversations with our labor partners. Coming forward on the July 27th board meeting are several AB 1200 disclosures, which basically document, it has the agreement or the memorandum of understanding, the MOU, complemented by the required AB 1200 disclosure form that discloses any financial impacts. So we've had some of our units, such as our teachers unit and our counselors unit, agree to 3 permanent work year, or 3 days of a reduction to their work year, where teachers, as an example, were at 187 days. They'll be going down to 184 days. So we've looked at that analysis. So that will be a benefit that'll help support the financials of the district. But upon board action, then we'll be able to make that adjustment and so forth. And again, we engage the county office. They've been reviewing those disclosures. That's all in accordance with the government code. And so we've given that to them 10 days prior to. And then we have actually some other recent agreements to other labor partners who've agreed to some changes as well. And so we'll be bringing forward that to the board on August 10th. So there's been a lot. And again, these numbers are going to be changing. So that's why I wanted to share, because I know it's on the agenda, the 45-day and the AB 1200, but not necessarily any attachments, because that's the work that's in the process right now.
Thank you, Dr. Sockeld. Do we have any questions about this report and the information? I guess we could.
I do.
Mr. Torres?
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the weeds very much because I know there's so much fluidity and I appreciate everything that Dr. Sockeld is doing, but I do have a couple germane questions and that would affect some of what's been presented. What I wanted to know is Sweetwater going to suspend the step column pay increases for the upcoming school year 2021?
So step and column changes would require bargaining. So those are items that would have to be negotiated with our bargaining unit. So
the school district hasn't undertaken any bargaining to that effect.
Those are not that item is not factored into the upcoming agreements that are coming before the board.
Okay. So what efforts are being undertaken by Sweetwater to increase ADA, since that has been espoused by the school district as one of the predicaments financially that's caused some of the budget shortfalls? So what is the school district doing to address the falling ADA in the school district?
So what I can mention, it's a very proactive approach by a lot of stakeholders within the district and with leadership. One area that is going to be noted in the upcoming AB 1200 disclosures and what was negotiated with our labor partners is our Launch Academy. That is a new program that is intended to help retain and attract other students who may have left in that particular platform. So we're anticipating to help, if it can, stabilize or bring back students, and also to help mitigate any loss to perhaps the charters. So that is a new program that is just getting started. I know there's been a reach out to families and to students regarding that. So that's an example. I know we've been working very closely with our school leadership in some areas there. So those are a couple of examples.
That's great. Okay, just two quick other questions. Is that on page 58 of your budget presentation, talking about Fund 49, there's if we can go to that slide. And then yeah, there you go. Is that there's a major increase in capitalized expenditures that's listed for 2021. And I wanted to know, is that for current projects that's in the planning phase right now that you expect to actually have a shovel in the ground? Or because I'm wondering how that's going to be paid when, again, you talked about the deferral and you're going to still continue to rely on Mello-Roos. But from what I heard, in agreement with the County Office of Ed, that withdrawal of monies will come at the end of the school year, not throughout the school year, to address your monthly cash flows, because you're going to get the advance of property taxes at the front of the school year and hopefully maybe avail yourself of trans. But I wanted to know, is that $23 million for projects currently in the works?
Yes, they are, and Dr. Gary could probably remind me here of the date. I want to say sometime in the spring. It may have been March or April timeframe. We brought forward, Dr. Gary did and his team brought forward a plan to the board on various projects.
Okay.
So those projects, and what you see here, this is a budget. It's a budget of $23 million. But again, it's timing, right? That those projects, because there needs to be design. There's different phases in the project. Right? And so we may not go through all that $23 million from an expense standpoint on the budget, then looking at the cash. So that's why we work very closely with the projects facility team to manage, okay, what is it that you have in queue and when do we anticipate paying contractors and so forth. But no, these are projects that we have identified with board approval to pursue. Now it's a matter of us continuing that work in 2021 to see how we will utilize that. And then if it's not, let's say, spent by the end of next June, that'll be rolled over. Same thing with where we're at with this year. Anything that doesn't get accounted for gets rolled into the next year.
Okay, so the last question is this, is that the updated, again, and again, I commend you for putting together this budget with so many unknown variables, is that the updated budget for the school year, that will be presented to the committee then at our next meeting on August 27th, I believe, so that we could review it and comment it. What about the DCBAs? Because as was noted in the FICMAT, the AB 139 audit, is that the board had not reviewed the DCBA that was cited on page 14 in Appendix C of the report. And this was something that I had brought up, if you recall, in my emails to the committee way back in February, and then asking about AB 1200. And then I had subsequent emails with Dr. Salkel, and she was very gracious to give me some key information. But I wanted to know, along with the updated budget, is the committee going to also see the DCBAs as well as the board?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've got quite a few, and our general counsel can also provide some background, but we've got quite a few going to the board on the 27th and the 10th. We can definitely bring them forward. They are public items, so this team has, provided that in accordance with the government code. So we have been bringing those forward with those items to the board for review with the financial piece to it.
Okay.
But we can definitely include that in our upcoming items because they will become public for board action in the upcoming.
Okay, thank you.
board
That's the questions I have. Thank you.
I just
Thank you, Dr.
want to clarify too, Dr. Salkeld, is the AB 139 report is about the 2018 year, 17-18 fiscal year, and what occurred then and what they looked at was that year only. It has, of course, the practice has changed. Is that correct?
Correct.
I believe to Mr. Torres's question on the AB 1200s. So
Right,
I just
and
wanted
that's-
to make
and that
sure
was
that
my
we
email.
clarify
Yeah.
that it has been going on since Dr. Salkeld has stepped into her role. Is that correct, Dr. Salkeld?
Correct. It's a very collaborative process, right? We can't complete an AB 1200 if we don't have a bargained agreement. So we work very closely as we're at the table bargaining, so we get all those financial considerations, do that analysis. So with that bargained agreement, working with our general counsel and our labor relations team and HR team where needed, then we compile that and the financial components come together, and that's why they go hand in hand with the board for action.
So
Yeah,
it is,
and I
but it
very
is
much
a
appreciate
fiscal.
that.
It is a fiscal document, correct?
The AB 1200 is focused on, there's a couple of elements to it. There's a financial analysis to it, and then there's required narratives to provide context. A lot of it could be programmatic, and that's where we need, others that are at the table. If there's programmatic changes, we include those pieces into that analysis. So we
Okay. All right, thank you.
And if I may, Member Hall, is that my email wasn't for what's going on under Dr. Salkel's tenure, but relative to what happened previously in relation to the 3.75 pay increase, and that was my query in the email that I sent, and which was duly noted in the AB 139 audit report. But I just want to clarify that for everybody on this call. But thank you anyway. That's my last question.
Thank you. General Counsel Carbucha, did you want to make a comment? I see you are.
So only because Dr. Salkeld kind of weighed that in, I think that is important to note that the AB 1200s do require obviously a superintendent and a CFO signature. Those aren't documents that the board approves with those actions. Those are documents that statutorily we're required to share with the county office. And so what we have done is implement a practice working with Dr. Salkeld's office where that is included now in our board items, even if it means we haven't gotten the document back from the county office until we go live, because it's set on a 10-day timeline from when we provide it to the county office before action. And so we actually have now begun a practice of not only having the AB 1200, but uploading after the fact the document from the county if they gave us one, just for posterity's sake and transparency going forward, as that wasn't a practice that in the past necessarily.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have, Mr. Gutkowski, did you have any questions on the budget
Yes, just
presentation?
an
Okay.
operational comment on slide 37. And it's as in terms of the savings and a potential area that the district may look at. Looking at, in earlier slide, our utilities are running just under 11 million. And so we're only projecting a $300,000 savings in the first quarter. If there isn't energy management strategies already in place, I would hope that the district can improve upon that number, seeing as the first 4 weeks we're not in school. But that's roughly, we're running about just under 1 million or 900,000 a month. So whatever we can do to conserve, I would like to see that.
Okay, Dr. Aguirre, are you with us? Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, so it's actually one of the areas we're actively looking at, in particular with an agreement to install battery backups. We were awarded grants for 3 of our campuses to install those battery backup systems, which should bring some additional savings. It's probably not going to happen until later in the year because of the fact we have to go through DSA for approvals. But it is something that's front and center, as well as other energy saving strategies, such as changing out to LEDs and other kind of low hanging fruit that's there for us. So we're in the process of doing that, and we already installed LEDs last year, and I want to say they brought us close to $600,000 or $700,000 worth of savings in utilities based on that action. So because again, it's one of those things that give you the highest savings to investment ratio. But those are active items we're looking at. Thank you, Mr. Gutowski. Good to see you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, if there's no further questions, I want to thank Dr. Sockeld and her team for the work that they've been doing ongoing, because this is the time when everything overlaps for the finance division, right? They're closing out the 1 year, building the budget, implementing a new budget, answering everyone's questions, and it's all tag team. So we know you're doing great things with your team, and we appreciate that. So I believe that is all we have for item C1. We'll move on to item C2, and that begins with the Crow 2018-19 audit, a status update from Crow LLP. Dr. Sockeld, would you like to lead that conversation off for us, please?
Trustee Hall. So we've got Mr. Kevin Smith with Crow LLP here on the call today. We've been working very diligently with his team, as we've shared previously at prior committee meetings. Key items is that we're still closing out the 2018-19 audit report. It was pending 2 key areas, or items, I should say. One being the AB 139 report. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at that information, their work, and certainly Mr. Smith will provide background of what they...
Excuse me, I hate to interrupt you, but there's some background noise going on. I just would request that everybody mute their calls, because that might help with that noise. It was difficult for me to understand Dr. Sockeld as she was speaking. I don't know if anyone else had difficulty, and sorry for the interruption. You go.
No worries. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at, and Mr. Smith will get into that detail about, looking and reflecting at the AB 139 report, because we were already doing a lot of work as it relates to FCMAT regarding the fiscal health analysis report itself and kind of how that played into the audit work. But most importantly, too, are a lot of the restatements. The team and I, along with staff, have spent a lot of time with the Crow team looking at entries that we had identified in the 2018-19 year, and even some that are still pending with 19-20. Some entries are pending to also be posted that relate back to 2017-18 year. So we want to make sure that this 18-19 report has the appropriate beginning balances, right? Ending 1 year, rolling into the next. So I'd like to hand off to Mr. Smith to provide an update, because we're almost there. We're getting down to that finish line hopefully here soon. So he'll provide you some updates as to where we're at with 2018-19, and then the interim work related to 2018-20.
Thank you, Dr. Stockpile. I think first and foremost, I would say yes, I do believe we see the finish line. But for those of you who might be runners, it's kind of like hearing you only have 2 miles left on a marathon. It's not exactly sounds real easy when you're at that point. But we are getting very close, close enough that we have developed a plan working very closely with management that we believe we will be delivering drafts of the financial statements, which would include the financial statements, single audit, the Measure O financial statements, as well as the Prop O performance audit to management on August 10th. And at that point in time, we'd also be requesting to be able to brief you guys on this committee upon the financial statements and the findings that we have related to internal controls, material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, as well as walking through the restatement footnotes on August 17th, and then be ultimately delivered and accepted by the board on August 24th. So I thought the chairwoman's comment was very that this is the time of year typically when they're worried about audit developing a budget and closing out a year. Dr. Stockpile and her team is dealing with one extra, and that's an audit from 12 months ago. I bring that up for a couple key points. One, management has been working very closely with us. An audit, I typically tell audit committees, is a very iterative process with lots of requests, lots of answers. With the FICMAT involvement as well as the SEC, this is significantly lowered our materiality from what we would typically see on an LEA engagement, which results in increased sample sizes, increased internal control test work. It just creates a significant amount of additional work. Management has been very cognizant and has been working very closely with us as we continue to make our requests. So I want to thank them for that. I guess first and foremost, I would say, I shouldn't have implied anything. I should just flat out say it. One of our processes as we were waiting on the FICMAT report, and I know Dr. Stockpile had briefed both the audit committee as well as the council or the school board as to we would perform a risk assessment upon receipt of that report and evaluate continuing our relationship with the school district. Upon receiving the FICMAT report and spending a significant amount of time with it, we found that the findings were very consistent with what we saw in the fiscal health. No new additional areas, just perhaps taking some areas and expanding some of the narrative and some of the details surrounding those. So we have concluded as a firm that we believe we can perform our audit at such a level of precision to mitigate our risk, and we will continue to perform the engagement. That coupled, we will also be issuing an engagement letter to Dr. Stockpile over the next 2 weeks to propose work for the fiscal year 19-20 engagement. So not only is management working in a couple of years, we actually anticipate that we'll begin working in a couple of years very quickly as well, as we have scheduled field work, primarily in the compliance areas for the week of August 5th. I think it's real key to point out that management has been very, I don't know what the right word I want to use, not demanding, but very forceful in that we adhere to a timeline to get the school district back on track. As many of you probably know, that there has been a blanket waiver that financial statements can be issued as of 3/31 versus the traditional December 15th deadline. Dr. Stockpile has asked for us to build our 19-20 plan based upon issuing in December 15th. I think her belief is that in order to stabilize, we've got to move beyond the sins of the past and get to the future as quickly as we can, and I happen to concur with her on that. When we bring forth our management letter, I anticipate material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. Many of those are due to the restatements that we've seen that relate to previous fiscal years. Again, if there was a question of the integrity of management, or if management had not been taking steps to address those issues, that would have been factored into our risk assessment from a client continuance standpoint. So we believe that management is taking appropriate steps to address the issues found in the FICMAT report, as well as the findings that we've identified within our audit process. Again, a lot of work to be done over the next 2 to 3 weeks in order to meet those drafts, but I'm confident that will occur. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions related to the audit with kind of the possible caveat or apology up front. The work is ongoing. Really no conclusions have been reached at this point in time, so to the extent that I can answer your question, I will. And to the extent that I can't, I will make note of it, and on August 17th, be prepared to answer that same question in a definitive manner as conclusions have been reached.
I do want to make excuse me, Mr. Torres.
No,
I do want to make sure that our questions are centered on the financial audit and not the FICMAT audit during this time. As you address your questions to the Crow manager, Mr. Smith, that you will make sure that you limit and center your questions to the actual financial audit comments that he made and not to the FICMAT AB 139 audit. Thank you.
Member Hall, there's no way that you can do that, because my question that I was going to ask is that relative, because of the work that came out of the AB 139 audit report, which your auditor from Crow alluded to, is that my question is this, and I have brought up this question in previous meetings about the effect of the 4 months of missing payroll, how it would affect the beginning fund balance of, or the ending fund balance of 17-18 and the beginning fund balance of 18-19. So my question that I wanted to ask the auditor from Crow is, with regard to the findings that was presented in the audit, in the AB 139 audit report.
Again, Mr. Torres, I am going to halt you there. We're not going to talk in this item about the AB 139. And that is simply because we have continued inquiries in that respect.
Well, it's relative to the scope of work.
What your question, I would ask you to reframe your question and limit it to maybe the posting of the payrolls when they did their financial audit. That is clearly within the scope of the financial audit, and it doesn't necessarily tie back to the AB 139 in that respect. And I would like to have Dr. Stockpile maybe start out, and then Mr. Smith respond as well.
Well, then if Dr. Stockpile can respond, but let's take it from there.
So Trustee Hall, as it relates to the current year that Crow's been looking at for 2018, 19, and 1920, we've provided all the payroll records. They review, they sample, as Mr. Smith mentioned, their level of materiality and so forth, has been addressed in that manner. As it relates to prior years, that activity and then the reports have indicated those entries were posted, they were just not posted timely. So at this point, it's not impacting the work that we're doing as it relates to 2017-18. That's not an item that we are restating. It's not, because that would have had cash implications, that would have had other considerations. Those entries were posted, just not as timely as it could have.
So then we can say that the beginning fund balance that was presented with regard to fiscal year 18-19 are solid. Then what the findings of that AB 139 report, and I was going to talk about the $33.9 million variance that it extrapolated that would affect presumably 18-19. You're telling me that we don't have to worry about that. The entries for 18-19, the beginning fund balance is solid. That's what you're telling us.
That's what we're working on. The payroll piece has not, we've been addressing other items that have been coming up that we as a team have identified through our reconciliation process in the fiscal years 2018-19. and 1920 that relate to 1718, but nothing in regards to that particular item noted by FICMAT. FICMAT had referenced timing of those entries.
Exactly. And that's the relevant point that I'm trying to make, is the timing of those postings, how it's going to affect the audit financial statements we're going to receive.
They were posted. So if we, again, looking back, 1718, those entries were posted in 1718. The payroll entries, they just were not posted in a timely, according to the standard or however that timing process. We, as management now, are posting our payroll within at least 7 business days or so. So the 1718 financials, that aspect of it is covered. So it's not going to be a factor in the work that we're doing with Pro right now.
And so relative to the auditor, then that is not an issue materiality relative to his audit findings, and will not be addressed in his management letter to the school district. Are you telling me that?
He hasn't gotten to that. We don't have that letter, right? And we have a meeting to address it when we do have that letter. So we'll be talking about that at our next meeting.
All right.
But not at this meeting.
Then
okay, but I would ask
Mr.
Mr. Smith if he has anything to add. He could go ahead and make a comment at this point.
I would agree with Dr. Stockpile. The comment within the FICMAT report is that the 4 months were not booked timely, but they were recorded within the time period. Whether that was backdating as far as the audit process goes or the closing of the financial statements, they were properly recorded to the 1617. That's indicated both within the report as well as what we have seen within our own audit procedures. I think what gave me pause in your question was related to the beginning fund balances as previously reported. Those will be restated, but not in relation to those 4 transactions. There are several errors, and I think the first thing that I would say about the errors versus quantifying them, I would say we have identified errors that go both ways. Improves fund balance, hurts fund balance, and that's very indicative of both internal control problems and the competency of the staff that were recording the transactions at the time, because there was not a bias, or there does not appear to be a bias or a manipulation to make things look good or bad. You know, in theory, if it's an error and you have multiple errors, you should have half going one way and half going the other way. And the restatement processes that we're seeing, or that have been identified, we do have, in fact, have errors going both ways.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Gutowski, do you have any questions?
Just one. There was also mention of overpayments, and as in terms of the salaries, and then wondering if that has been reconciled or not, and if the district will look at those.
Are you talking about the AB 139 audit again?
But then it
because
affects
that's
then,
a different item. Where
okay, if we'll get the chance to address that, but it will potentially affect the financial statements for those periods.
Dr. Stockpile, do you?
In terms of, again, the sampling of the work, you know, we've been working closely with our payroll team, working closely with the Pro team. If there's anything that they have sampled, if there were overpayments of staff or things like that, we would have addressed it and have reviewed it, collected those monies back. So I don't, in that particular regard, we've been sampling a lot of information and looking at employees' pay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Solis, do you have any questions?
Not at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so are we going to, did we cover both audits from the Crow LLP? Did you make all the comments you were going to make, Mr.
Yes.
Smith? All right. Well, we really appreciate your time, and I thank you for your time here. And
Thank
we
you.
look forward to seeing you next month.
I do as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, you could stay if you wanted to, but I didn't know if you'd want to. Okay, so now we will move on to the AB 139 audit. And I do have some comments before we get started. There's been a significant level of interest regarding the FCMAT AB 139 extraordinary audit regarding the district's financing. After receiving the audit on June 24th, 2020, our district prepared and delivered the required response to the San Diego County Office of Education by the 15-day window on July 7th, 2020. I've asked this item to be added to today's agenda so Dr. Aguirre and Dr. Sockeld could provide an update on the FCMAT audit and our plan for implementing the recommendations. We will not be discussing questions regarding the status of either the referral to the district attorney or to the Securities Exchange Commission, except to say we continue to work cooperatively with these agencies. As we have indicated all along as trustees, we have a commitment to continue to cooperate with any ongoing reviews and inquiries. As we mentioned in the response to the San Diego County Office of Education, the district continues to improve practices. For example, of utmost priority is an upgrade to fully integrated financial and human resource systems. Dr. Sockeld and her team have been implementing a solution of ensuring our financial systems communicate with the San Diego County Office of Education system through the implementation of the Infor financial system. This will better align the financial and human resource systems for our district and enable a more direct link to the San Diego County Office of Education systems. Additionally, as you are aware, the district implemented a fraud hotline, reporting hotline available to both the public as well as internal staff, with quarterly reports shared with the subcommittee. As noted in the letter to the San Diego County Office of Education, individuals specified in the FCMAT extraordinary audit are either no longer in the district or not serving in a capacity to be involved in continued financial inquiries in the district. Lastly, and most importantly, it is important to emphasize that during this response, our focus must continue to be on serving and educating our students and their families in our community. Above the usual start of school issues, this year we are also dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and educating students in a distance learning environment as set forth by Governor Newsom as recently as Friday. This is key. While we are cooperating with a multitude of agencies regarding our AB 139 audit, our focus cannot be lost on serving our students. And I appreciate all the comments and questions, and I just wanted to make sure we have that framework in mind as we proceed to the next item, which is the AB 139 FCMAT Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team report. And Dr. Sockeld, could you walk us through a little bit, perhaps some key points on what you're doing to address the recommendations as we move this district forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee
I
Hall.
don't know if Dr. Aguirre wanted to make a comment first. Dr. Aguirre, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Trustee Hall. I think you encapsulated that conversation very well. From our perspective, we can't lose track and focus on students, but I'd like for Dr. Sockeld to provide an overview of the work that has been going on in her area, and I'll ask Dr. Sockeld to add to that.
And before you stop, I just wanted to say, Dr. Aguirre, I appreciate that you have turned this into a collaboration with the County Office of Ed. And that is the focus of where this district wants to be and where we're moving. And I appreciate that we partnered with them on this, and that we're, and Mr. Scavarna has been key in a lot of that work as well. So we thank him as well. And now we'll go on to Dr. Sockel. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hall and Dr. Aguirre. So I'd like to echo your points, Trustee Hall, regarding some of the key items that were noted in the letter in response back to the county office in reference to the AB 139 report that we received on June 22nd. We've reflected as a management team and as a collective leadership team, what are the recommendations that are noted in there, and really aligning it to our corrective action plan. I think Mr. Kevin Smith with Pro said it well too, that a lot of these items revert back or kind of also relate back to what was in the fiscal health analysis report provided by FCMAT back in December 2018. So we've been putting a lot of things in place, but again, addressing the most recent recommendations in the FCMAT report. But there is a common theme as it relates to N4 and what's noted. N4, the fact that the district needs a much more robust accounting system to deliver and integrate the work, but also help manage key areas such as position control, when a lot of our labor costs, 85 to 87, more like 87% of our district overall costs are in labor. And so, we've been putting a lot of things in place in the area of working with the tool that we have, which is TrueCourse. It's kind of our business system, but we also have N4 HR module, and then we have the PeopleSoft payroll system. So as you can imagine, in most accounting business systems, which is known as an ERP, an enterprise resource program, it's integrated. So when you have these different systems, they kind of work in silos. And so we've been spending a lot of time integrating as best as we can, utilizing TrueCourse to its current capacity, but it can be so much more robust. There's still a lot of areas of weakness. And so us shifting away from this 20-plus-year-old program that is archaic in some of its functionality, and shifting it to the N4, bringing the N4 financial module to the N4 HR module, to really have a better handleability on our costs and the ability to create some much more robust reports that don't exist now. We've been doing a lot of things, tracking it in Excel. I mean, since I've come on board, tried to create a lot of things that were not there before. Again, looking at positions. This last budget cycle, we created staffing worksheets that noted all of the positions, matching it to a personnel action request, which is known as a PAR. And there's still some opportunities. I mean, certainly our work's not done, but it is a much better place than where it was 2 years ago. And so that has helped us continue to refine our budget process. So I can't stress enough how the N4 piece of it, and we've kicked off that work over the last month. And really right now our two priority areas are position control and the financial, the baseline, right, of any financial is looking at chart of accounts, the basic elements of that, what kind of reports can we get from that, how do we structure that? So we're starting with that foundation. And so that's going to take at least 18 months, perhaps 24 months, but we are going to be working with the county office on that. When we went through the implementation partner selection process through a request for proposal, we wrote specifications in that proposal that indicated that we would have interface files provided to the county office on like a daily basis. So they will now have real time to look at our data as well. So we've been working through that process. So I believe that N4 is going to highlight and mitigate those risk areas that are noted in the current AB 139 report and the previous fiscal health analysis report. So that's one key area. And then Trustee Hall, you mentioned the hotline. The hotline that did go into effect in late 2018, and as evidence, the internal audit team, they have it also on their agenda today to present to the committee. that they provide quarterly updates. You know, there's that tool that's an area now that's been made available. So that's, you know, a key practice, a key structure put in place. But one area of opportunity, again, a recommendation from noted in the report is, and we're working closely with our general counsel, is to train our staff on fraud prevention, on risk mitigation. So we are working to provide that here in the near future, rather soon, over the course of the next few months, that we can at least have that and then put in practices in place that periodically provide that training. Another key area that I'd like to highlight that was noted in the report and goes back to you know, those internal controls and structures. In some case that were non-existent or lacking, and in our area, myself and working with the management team, these are fundamental things such as account or balance sheet reconciliations or cash reconciliations. And even a separate and aside from the FICMET reports, the cash reconciliations were noted in the external audit report for several years. So that the management team and I and the CRO team even acknowledged this in their initial draft back in December that they brought to the committee for the 2018-19 year. We've put systems in place. I mean, obviously, many of us weren't here at the beginning of the 2018-19 year, but when we recognized these prior year audit findings, you know, and then we got the team in place and started to also capacity building for staff, giving them, you know, building cash flow statements as an example for some of our funds that didn't exist, and putting those review mechanisms, reviewing this on a monthly basis, so that we can look at these cash flows for the other funds and their connection to general fund. Looking at balance sheet items, saying you've got an accounts receivable, you know, a balance of X. Okay, what's the supporting documentation that goes with that? So that has been areas that, again, we're not 100%. We're not there yet, but we've made significant strides over the last, you know, about 24 months, and it'll become evident in the work that we're doing now with the external auditors. That's how a lot of these restatements came about. As we're looking at this, going, this is data related to a prior year. We need to, you know, make those adjustments. What is our accounting of it? So those are examples of things we've put in place. As it relates to position control, one thing I think we've probably highlighted this at a prior meeting, but in this last year with board action a little over a year ago, because that was the missing link, as I say, we needed a position control analyst who could be that hub and that liaison amongst finance to make sure a position is in the budget, be that liaison with HR as they place someone into a budgeted position, and then that liaison with payroll. That role has evolved so much in this last year and really has been that gatekeeper, and we've put a lot of processes in place, not just with that position alone, but with management and that oversight with it. So, you know, I think those are examples of key areas as we look at this whole process as a corrective action plan and how we move forward to remedying this and ensuring that the necessary structures are in place going forward. Recognizing that there's still opportunity, but definitely we're on that path of really putting a very solid infrastructure for now, but then also in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Stockpile. So,
Will we be allowed to ask a question?
yes, you can ask a question.
Okay. So, well, Dr. Salkfeld, I'm glad you, in your presentation, talked a little bit about the internal controls, because one of the questions that I had, which was not addressed in the required 15-day response by the school district, was how it was going to address the internal control deficiencies that were noted in page 46 of the report. So I would assume that those deficiencies will be addressed in the corrective action plan that Dr. Salkfeld talked about, as far as, you know, the district formulating and moving on. And I just want to make sure that relative to those noted deficiencies in internal controls, that will be part of the corrective action plan, and then that corrective action plan will be provided to the committee in our next meetings as it evolves, so that way that the committee itself can opine on, its viability, if you will. With me?
Dr. Aguirre, would you like to maybe address some of that, what we're doing and how that corrective action plan in collaboration with the county, we're working through that. You might want to take the lead on that question. Thank you. You're muted.
Your audio.
And that's how you solve all the problems in the world. So, what I was trying to say is, what I was saying is that in my 3.5 weeks here, one of the very specific efforts that we've undertaken is working more closely with the County Office of Education. As we go through that, we can, as it evolves, obviously, and we continue to improve on our practices, I think of course, we can share what is appropriate to share. We'd have in consultation with the county to see what's appropriate with council. But as we continue to work on resolving and responding to the issues, I see no reason why we couldn't share. Again, we'd go through an internal mechanism, but as long as we go through that, I don't see why we couldn't share as this response evolves. Because again, our focus has been on moving forward, but that includes improving our practices. Any organization, I think, regardless of where you look, there's going to be things that can be improved upon. And so as we go through that, yes, we can bring those items forward.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
For my part, I just want you to know I am really wanting to make sure that the subcommittee does have a lens on everything, because that's what I feel is the role, so that we can help inform the board on issues. But I also wanted to thank Dr. Stockpile, because what we know is true, there is much opportunity to improve. Even in a district that has a lot of the structure already in place, is continuing to refine their practice, right? So that they have better control on finances and on the day-to-day work. And I believe that has been her focus since starting with the district. I know that we appreciate that. Did you have another question, or did Mr. Gutkowski, did you have a question?
Just one more is that, does the district anticipate hiring another internal auditor to help with everything? Because not just with regard to the internal control processes that were, or deficiencies, but we have the internal audit report that's going to be provided, we're going to talk about later on, and a lot of it has been put off by the COVID-19 pandemic. But it would seem to me that the district would be behooved, if you will, to hire one more staff to assist with a lot of these internal audits in a lot of these areas that we're going to be talking about later. I just wanted to know, does the district plan on hiring an additional person to assist?
So thank you, Mr. Torres. As you know, the budget at this point has been adopted, and it's not my understanding that there's funding for a position. That doesn't mean that it's not something that we can explore moving forward in future budgets. But for fiscal year 2020, 2021, it's my understanding that there's funding for the 2 internal audit positions. And if it's different, I would ask Dr. Sokol to correct that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah.
Right, and I just want to say we can make a recommendation to that effect if the board, if this committee feels that that's essential at this point. We might want to wait till we get through that. That's my feeling. We could recommend to the board likely at this point in time, facing all the issues around a 45-day budget adjustment and reduction in revenues and COVID reduction on what the state is going to do moving forward. We have to be cautious when it comes to establishing, salaried positions, or I call them salaried because you get a monthly salary, but that's not, they're really just like anybody else, it's an hourly pay. But I think we have to be cautious as a board. I just wanted to say that as a board member, that would be the lens I would look through, because I appreciate personally the work done by our internal auditors, and I recognize the fact that there's a lot there to do for two people. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Torres. Did you have any other questions or comments? Mr. Gutowski, did you have any comment or question?
Yes. I know in the previous system that we ended up having for position control, individuals that were teachers and were non-tenured were actually able to gain tenure because they were able to exceed their load over X amount of years, and the district then ended up having to give them essentially a contract. So in relation to the position control, are individuals that are less than 1.0 FTE going to be able to track accurately within this new system, so that we don't run into cases where all of a sudden we have to issue full-time jobs and contracts?
I would maybe want to put that question to our general counsel first, because she works with the labor side of our district. But I'd also say that regardless of what you might have in the system, it's those things that don't make it into the system that really have us in a position that is where the unknowns keep popping up. So it's really where I see Dr. Stockpile in the position control process that's been established is a better handle on those unknowns, because there's accountability is being followed through with when people don't do the process properly. And General Counsel Carbucha, would you like to possibly address Mr. Gutowski's question, please?
Sure. And I'm sure actually Dr. Sockhild, as it relates to position control, will be able to jump in. So I'm not exactly sure from a load perspective. I'm thinking you might mean that they've worked more than 75% of the year, which is a number of days. From that perspective of knowing where they are, and really HR has put a number of processes in place, in particular with substitutes, as well as with cavanaughing and with contracting and from a temporary perspective as well, to make sure that we are there. I think position control really does help that, because it makes sure when you have to go through a full PAR process that you know what you've been budgeted for at a site, and that there is a check from the site level to what's going on here. And I think that's going to be all the more important this year, because we do have statutory obligations as it relates to laid off teachers and laid off substitutes, or laid off teachers who would have the right to serve as subs or as temps. So Jen, did you want to speak to position control more than that, or any of the other checks and balances?
I think, again, it's just monitoring. I mean, that's an area of opportunity that we can look in the new system that integrates to make sure we're tracking folks, so that way it mitigates a risk when someone does get to that level, that percentage. But it is, like Dr. Trustee Hall mentioned, it's that dialogue of knowing where amongst the different departments, where are those risks? Where are they tracking those hours? We need to have tools in place collectively to discuss that. How do we do that, and who monitors that? To then kind of flag, okay, this can be a potential issue, and so that we can incorporate that, and if anything, definitely mitigate that risk. But then if it's something, again, if it had to be bargained or anything like that, we're looping in the appropriate party. I think it's the dialogue and the monitoring that needs to happen, the accountability.
And I would say also, Dr. Stockhild, would you say that monitoring the payroll is key too? And that would be something that our internal auditors do also, is check the payroll and audit during the year. They have different points that they look at. I would say that the budget analysts are involved in that. There's a whole process, and then the Dr. Stockhild and her management team would be reviewing those things and asking the very more specific questions when things don't align with projections all along the way. I mean, I would think that that would be your practice now. So we can maybe hear back possibly in the December meeting how that's worked for this year. You kind of provide a report and a standing item for this. I'm not a standing item, but a report back in December on how it's gone for, how's that working for this fiscal year. And then we can follow up with that and understand if it needs refining, what you found, how it's working, and how what you're seeing, and as far as people in positions that weren't budgeted, if there are any, how that's being addressed. Which my hope is that for everybody that manages the school, so at the principal level, I would, as a board member, expect them to be managing appropriately the positions that they've been given and not catching the district with surprises. And that is where I speak to, and the same with the department managers and the executive directors. It's on them if they find those practices are ongoing, because I believe the board will hold those people accountable when they're not following process and procedure, because we just can't afford it anymore. So I think for that question, do you have a follow-up question, Mr. Gachowski?
No further questions. Thank you for the thorough answer.
Thank you.
And follow-up.
Mr. Torres, did you have any more questions? Okay. So now we'll go on to the ongoing and completed external audit and reviews. That's Dr. Stockpile.
As Carolina brings that item up. So these are other reviews, other things that come up, aside from like the financial audit that the CROW team provides. These could be programmatic in nature. And so she pulls that up. We provide an ongoing, we started just a little over a year ago, providing this to the committee. We've just restructured it a little bit since our last update in May. So as you can see here, there's a program piece to it. So this first section, it's not necessarily an audit per se, right, financial, but it's a review of the program. Sometimes some of these program reviews could have some financial outcomes of it related, so that's why we keep an eye on this piece and bring it here to the committee. So this is ongoing, I believe a draft. It's in final stages as I understand it. It'll be brought forward to the board here in the near future as it relates to a focus of the special education program within the district. And again, it's noted here as ongoing. Once we have a little bit more information, we'll be bringing that forward to the board, but hopefully here soon it'll be presented and finalized. The next section kind of we just called out a little bit more, so these fiscal reviews. From time to time, we will get various agencies that we have contracts with, or it could be even a grant, a grant in itself. They want certain reports, and they kind of do some follow-up. This one here is the state of California, the behavioral, the Medi-Cal program. They look at invoices, they look at billings, they can see if different pieces, if there's any concerns or if it's okay. So right now we don't have an update since the last update we provided to the committee in May. We have been following up with the program manager. Our staff has provided in finance information, so at this point it's not complete. But as soon as we do have the closeout report or the outcome from it or anything like that, we will definitely bring that forward to the committee. The next item is to keep the committee apprised. We have our required for Ed Code, our physical inventory of our assets. I know we spent a bit of time on this last time. We do have the work that we're finalizing from the 1920. Work with them once principals and their staff come back at the end of play this month. We're going to start in early August, working with them on any items that we need to address for the 1920 year, because they'll be back on site, and then we'll complete that work. And then we're planning ahead for the firm, Records Consultant Inc., to be back on site in early spring, probably around February or March timeframe. So we're working on that. Again, that's in compliance with our education code. So we'll have that. And then the next page, let's scroll down, Carolina. I don't know where those other ones are. Okay, well, again, we've got listed then the external audits, which were the AB 139. Again, that was timing completed just recently. We have our financial audit, and then the items with the Crow partner shared just a little bit ago. And again, these are just listed here, so that you have one comprehensive document of what's programmatic in nature, what's fiscal in nature, and then the external parties. So hopefully by the end of next month, when they present, we'll at least have the 2018-19 then completed by the end of next month. And we'll start into the 1920. So that's what we have here at this point. And again, this could also change. You know, next month we can have, you know, something else. I think it's just a unique environment right now with a lot of these agencies, because they also have staff working from home or working remotely. So again, it's kind of, I think, timing on some of these items, but again, we'll keep the committee apprised as new requests come in.
Thank you. Did you have any questions? Anyone on these?
Yeah, just one comment. If the physical inventory report can be shared with this committee, once it's generated, I know there was some outstanding items that were on there. I would like to see that followed up on.
Definitely.
Thank you. I think that might be on the also, I don't know, I shouldn't say anything. Okay, so that's it. No other questions for this section. All right, so we'll move on to the internal audit items. That's item 3, C3. So who will lead that conversation? Would that be?
Good evening, Trustee Hall. This is
Thank
Daphne Enriquez, one of the internal auditors, and I'll go ahead and begin. You're welcome with that first item. So that first internal audit item is the work plan for the current year ending June 30, 2021. For the most part, it was rolled forward from the prior year, so it may look it may look familiar if the two are compared. If we begin on the first page after this cover sheet, there is a little bit of background about how the work plan determines the framework of activity for the department. And then it leads into the objective, which summarizes that this risk assessment is performed to serve as a tool to help identify, analyze, and prioritize potentially high-risk areas. The bullet list lists some of the potential risk factors that were taken into consideration as part of the risk assessment. And if we go to the next page, we outlined some of the procedures performed, such as gathering information throughout the year from sources such as internal and external audit reports, board meetings, and discussion with district staff. We also reviewed prior year's internal audit work plans to ensure an understanding of previously identified risk. We also solicit feedback from district administration for potential audit areas. And with that information, we utilized a control risk rating assessment scale for each of those identified auditable areas, considering the likelihood and impact of risk factors. If you scroll down to the next section, I did add a note for COVID-19 considerations. We will be going over our ongoing and completed where it was noted by Mr. Torres that in the prior year, a lot of our plan was changed as a result of the COVID-19, which included postponing, canceling, or discontinuing some of our audit engagements. Most of these areas were rolled forward to the current year work plan, and we indicated which of those may also be postponed, discontinued, or have a reduced scope due to COVID-19. Also, for this current year, we will continue to reassess our communication and our interaction practices, such as the consideration of implementing a secure data transfer system, as well as opportunities that will enable us to effectively carry out our responsibilities. So one of our biggest obstacles with the COVID-19 was access to information or to be able to review information that would normally or traditionally be provided as hard copies. So that's where the secure data transfer system would be a good opportunity for us to continue moving forward in the absence of having access to that. So if you go to the next page, which is 3, this is the results of our risk assessment performed. This is our internal audit work plan for the year. This schedule represents the audit areas that received a high control risk rating as part of our risk assessment and the internal audits and projects that will be performed during the year. Audit areas that were rolled forward from the prior year are highlighted in yellow. So as previously mentioned, most of these were rolled forward from the prior year. A new item, if you go to page 4, is the testing of payroll transactions. And on the next page, which is 5, we also list our non-audit services as we provide a variety of services to the district that includes those that may be advisory in nature. So advisory consulting, they may include training as well as administrative tasks that we will also perform. And on our last page, there is also a new item about follow-up reviews that we will also conduct those type of reviews to determine if administration has implemented corrective action and the timeliness of those actions taken on reported engagement findings and recommendations. And we welcome any other feedback from this committee on these items or any other considerations.
Thank you. So, thank you, Daphne. Mr. Torres or Mr. Gutowski or Board Member Solis, do you have any questions on the work plan? Mr. Torres, go ahead.
Let other people talk first. I've been interjecting myself at the beginning, so I'll let other people talk first.
All right, Mr. Gutowski, did you have comments or questions?
Good work. No comment.
Thank you.
Board Member Solis? No?
I don't believe he's raised his hand, so.
No questions at this time.
Okay, so the question that I have, again, because of COVID, and it's put such a, it's made everything problematic as far as deliveries of services, especially professional services. I wanted to ask the auditor is how realistic are those dates, those target dates in the if you go to the internal audit work plan, the high risk areas. How realistic are those target dates that's listed? In other words, by the end of June 30th, 2021, are we going to subsequently be rolling a lot of this work to the next school year? And the reason why that I'm asking is one area that's of considerable interest to me is purchasing. And so I just want to be told up front, hey, is this viable, or do you anticipate we're just going to have to keep rolling this into subsequent years? Because again, there's only 2 internal auditors in the district.
Right. Ideally, we would like to meet all of our objectives, but unfortunately, there are unforeseen circumstances as well as the timing of some engagements that may prevent the completion of one or more of these areas. Mm-hmm. So our work plan to begin is not a commitment to complete all those objectives. We'll do our best to meet all of those. So I added a note at the top of that schedule to note that it's all tentative, and we will work with other departments such as fiscal services to determine the best timing on moving forward to and being flexible with other priorities that fiscal services may have. But yeah, our prior year was a very heavy workload for our 2-person department. And again, we did experience an unforeseen circumstance which reduced our staffing to 1 auditor for about 3 months. Mm-hmm. And again, there's some non-audit work that did take a significant amount of time. So in performing our risk assessment, we did also take that into consideration. again, it is a heavy workload for the two of us, but I think this year we have a better idea of what priorities we have and a better game plan moving forward to complete those.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel bad for you, really, because that, like you said, that's a tremendous amount of work for just two people. So anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So Daphne, I do have something I would expect that if you're finding significant issues with completing even the first few as you go through the year, where you're finding it hard to get to those objectives and complete them, that you would inform the chair of the subcommittee so we can at least make sure we have that conversation and we're aware of it, and then we can bring those back to the committee for review as needed. I think what I want to say to this committee is that we expect there be a link to the board from the internal auditors so that they can come with issues directly to board members, but particularly Mr. Solis and I, since we are in the Audit Finance Subcommittee. And also they work directly under our superintendent, Dr. Aguirre. So we are refining those communication links to make sure that we support them in the ways that they can get the information they need and complete the work as they move forward. And one of the issues I think we found, which was that Dr. Janney had assigned them to do the reconciliation of the inventory rather than do an audit of the reconciliation. So that sort of threw that in as a wrench in this whole process. So we're going to have to talk about what that means to us as far as an internal audit oversight of that. And is that something that I would ask Dr. Stockpile, is that an extra, is that a normal on the external auditor that will be reviewing the reconciliation of the inventory and the plan to adjust any of those items? Because it's my understanding in conversation with the internal auditor that a lot of the items that were not accounted for physically when they were completing it were really old items that probably hadn't been aged off the inventory listing properly, or were on there as capital and weren't really capitalized. So I would like to understand, how is that going to work when the auditors are now in the process, or they're in the role of reconciling those instead of just auditing a reconciliation. So if you want to talk to us about that.
I appreciate that, Trustee Hall, because this is definitely an area that I've seen of opportunity. I mean, I think there's one aspect, and with their help, it's been a lot of a cleanup. I mean, that's an area that we spent quite a bit of time with the CROW team as we've been looking at the fixed assets and putting a structure in place to really monitor. There's a lot of day-to-day that goes with that, and there is a gap in that area that we need to revisit, and there is, and I think it's been noted in one of the internal auditor reports, there is a conflict. I think there's been some legacy piece of it with some of those transactions, but we really need to separate that so that the internal auditors can truly be reviewing the fixed assets. I do believe there's an area we need to reevaluate that so that they can focus their efforts on checking in on the process, not being part of that process. And I think that's where there's that conflict. And I think there's been prior year, many years, in terms of where the internal audit team has been engaged in this with what's related to fixed assets. But the work at this point has been a lot of cleanup. But I think how we address it going forward, we have an opportunity to look at that structure so they can focus their efforts in another area and create that check and balance, that segregation of duties. Hopefully
yes, Mr. Solis, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, with regards to hiring or having more personnel, to Ms. Enriquez, what what would you say a good amount of personnel for you to have an internal auditing would be? What would a good number be?
I'm sorry, as far as additional staffing?
Yes.
I think adding an additional person such as a staff auditor would help out tremendously with most of the day-to-day items, such as maybe what are considered non-audit. An area that takes a significant amount of our time, for example, is for the review of the commercial warrants. During this past year, we reviewed over 9,000 of them. And that's 2 to 3 times out of the week. And unfortunately, that takes away a lot of our focus on some of those other high priority areas. So they can help out in that area is also a lot of the advisory and consulting services that we provide to the ASBs.
Okay. Yeah, and I thank you for that, and I appreciate that, because what Mrs. Hall brought up with regards to making a recommendation to the entire board, maybe, if there's a lot of work here, and if we can scrounge it out somewhere where we can hire somebody else to help out, I think it would probably be a good recommendation to make. But I guess we'll talk about that a little further along, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things I believe that in discussion with the internal audit, that they adjusted this year was they were doing an internal audit of every ASB 2 times a year. And you've adjusted that plan, Daphne, I believe. Are you going to speak to that at all about, or is that coming later in your discussion?
That's something we can address now or in later discussion. Maybe I can add at this time that although we did have to postpone those audits, we do review the ASB monthly financials, and we follow up with ASBs, and we scan those financials for any unusual activity. So we feel that kind of mitigates, or not kind of, but it does mitigate some of those other risks in not performing those audits.
Thank you. So if that's all on the audit plan, then we can go on to your ongoing and completed internal audits.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic on to Mr. Moreno for that.
Good afternoon. So in regards to the ongoing and completed internal audit, there really hasn't been a change from the prior subcommittee, with the exception of the fraud hotline quarter report being issued, that I believe it's the next item. But our focus has been on the last few months has been reviewing and actually updating the ASB Club Advisor Manual. Last year we completed we worked with staff and providing the ASB manual, but now we're going a little bit more detail for ASB advisor manuals. That way they can provide to their clubs or trusts or coaches, whomever has those type of clubs, as well as other non-audit tasks, such as we did the risk assessment that resulted in the audit work plan, as well as, as Daphne mentioned earlier, reviewing the financial packets and supporting ASBs with their year-round wrap-up. And also, we're currently waiting for the June closing financial statements, and also reviewing warrants and the commercial warrants and other engagements.
Okay, so can you, for the benefit of all of us on this committee, could you kind of walk through how you perform the work of auditing the warrants or doing the bank statement reviews? Our sites, all of the ASBs conducting business when the school is in session, and do those clerks go into their office and do work and then send you through fax documents or whatever? Is that how that works? Oh, I guess I've been muted this whole. No, I haven't been. That was you, Gerardo. You've been muted. So could you walk us through what happens and how you conduct that review and audit?
Or I'm sorry, you're referring to the ASB audits or the review of the monthly financial statement packets?
both. I mean, you can talk to each thing that if you would.
Okay, well, for the prior year that we just completed, on a monthly basis, we receive their monthly financial statement packets. I'm not sure what their scheduling is like. I'm sorry, there's an echo. Let me wait for that to clear. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure what their scheduling is like. I believe during COVID-19 school closures, they were going in once or twice a week, or as it may have been considered necessary, working with their administrator to complete those financial statement packets. So upon our review, it's the basic financial statements, so balance sheet, statement of revenues and expenses, bank reconciliation reports, a summary of their general ledger activity. So we just do our checks to make sure that everything balances, that there's no unusual activity. We recalculate the bank rec and match those to the financials. If there's any unusual items or just something that we feel we need additional information on, we reach out to the ASB accounting technician as well as the APS student activities to inquire. When we're done, we sign off on those and we scan them into an internal audit network share drive, which is also shared with fiscal services. When we conduct the audits of the ASBs, we send out, as with any other engagement, an engagement letter. We send them a list of items that will be needed for the audit. We primarily focus on areas such as cash receipts, cash disbursements, and review other areas with internal controls, such as how the fundraisers are conducted. We also take a look at their financials and other control documents they may have on file, such as how they maintain their records for tickets, how they maintain their inventory. But those are the primary areas of focus. So once we conduct our field work, we wrap up our work papers, we issue a report, and then we follow up on any findings.
Thank you. And would you describe to me how you're monitoring and auditing the payroll items, like how the salary, or I mean the time cards and input into the payroll system for those hours, etc. Could you walk us through that a little bit? I think this team would be interested in hearing how that is audited, how that work's done.
Well, that was on our work plan for the prior year. Unfortunately, that wasn't something that we were able to get around to, so it was rolled forward to our current year work plan. And for those areas that were rolled forward, we may test areas for both of those periods. But that type of audit would include substantive procedures, which are designed to detect any misstatements, and we test details. We may perform analytical procedures. We'll also test controls, such as how those payroll reports may be forwarded, how they're reviewed, how they may be agreed to, what's posted in the general ledger, etc.
I appreciate that things got a little interrupted this year, but I would see that as a priority for the 2020-2021 year audit. And I looking at the committee's heads nodding, I feel that they would support that as well. Do you have any other questions for this, for Ms. Enriquez or Mr. Moreno? Mr. Torres, did you have some questions about the ongoing?
No,
completed?
I just empathize with Ms. Enriquez and Mr. Moreno, but just going with Board Member Solis, I hope we can take that up at the end of the meeting, the consideration of proposing additional staff, because, and again, I hate to go back, but in light of the findings of the AB 139 audit, I think it behooves the Sweetwater to get sufficient staff to address those issues and address the internal work plan, because as noted in the report, things are being rolled over, not just because of COVID-19, but as noted in the report, it's because of other priorities. So they're not able to get to a lot of the substantive work that they need to get to, because as noted by Ms. Enriquez, they're they're unfortunately devoting a lot of their time to other things. And
Yes,
so
I
anyway,
agree. I totally agree. And I, as chair, report to the board, sometimes just an oral report. I've done it in the past, an actual written letter to the board reporting back on our meetings. But I will bring that forward to our next board meeting and let them, the whole board know that is highly recommended, so that they hear that and hopefully support that action. But again, everything we do financially, especially when it comes to any kind of additional positions that were not in our original budget, these are all overseen not only by the board, and as they bring those recommendations or changes are brought forward, by the superintendent on our monthly agendas, but they're reviewed and approved by our financial advisor and the San Diego County Office of Ed. So there's extra steps to all of that, but it certainly is acknowledged, and I know we all agree on that front. So if you have no other questions we'll go on to the fraud hotline update. Is that Dr. Moore going to present that, or is that Daphne?
Well, I planned on speaking on this item, so I can move forward with that.
That's great. Thank you.
Welcome. So the last item is the report that was issued for the quarter ended June 30th. For this last quarter, there were no fraud hotline submissions, and for the fiscal year, there was a total of 5. As of year end, all of those 5 cases have been closed. If we go to the second page, that's a table that summarizes the reports that we received during the fiscal year and the current status, again noting that they were all closed. So there have been no new cases since our last meeting.
Okay, so Daphne, kind of go over how the fraud hotline works, or would you like Dr. Moore to address that?
Well, the fraud hotline is, we work with a third-party provider that administers the fraud hotline. It's designed for reporting suspected cases of fraud. It's not a substitute for instructional, curricular, student complaints, or for employment-related grievances or appeals. When a fraud hotline submission is made, the compliance department and the Office of Internal Audit is notified by the third-party provider, and we review the cases to determine if they should be evaluated or reviewed either by the compliance department or by internal audit. Usually internal audit investigates the fraud-related complaints.
I think it's important to note it is an outside fraud agency that monitors and receives those calls. So we're not having the fox watch the chicken. So just so you know. Okay, so if there's any questions, Mr. Torres or Mr. Gachowski, and the board approved to extend this fraud hotline and contract last, I don't know, I think it was in May or June. So it's ongoing. I expect that a lot of activity, if there's any issues around construction items and things like that, that would be where people might call in as well. I mean, I think that would be one of the main uses for this fraud hotline, aside from just the normal day-to-day stuff we've seen this past year in the 5 reports that came forward. Just, I know that you probably experienced that in your own lives in the way you've been involved with government finances and accounting and all that. So it's not an unusual thing to see a lot of that, but we haven't seen too much this year. So thanks. Now we'll move on to, and I just want to say, is there something you wanted, Mr. Torres? Okay, I wanted to thank Mr. Moreno and Ms. Enriquez for their work, and we appreciate it. Now we'll move on to a review of the minutes. Did you all review the minutes from last May's meeting?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Mr. Gachowski. a second by Mr. Solis. Does anybody object to approving the minutes? Hearing no objection, I would say the minutes are approved. Oh, maybe we need to take a verbal vote just for sure. So Mr. Gutowski, your vote? Yes. Could you verbally vote for the recording, Mr. Gutowski?
Yes, motion, yes, approved.
Mr. Torres?
Approved.
Mr. Solis?
Yes.
And yes. So it's 4 yeses. The motion passes. And now we'll talk about the calendar of meetings for 2020-2021. Dr. Stockpile?
So thank you, Trustee Hall. So as Carolina pulls that up, as we mentioned earlier during the audit presentation by the CROW team, so we've got a date listed for next month on August 17th, because Mr. Kevin Smith had indicated. So we've got there, well, they'll bring a draft. So we've added that additional date to the schedule. So that way we can also bring it forward to the board on August 24th for action. Then we do, and at that point too, at that meeting, we'll bring forward the 45-day budget revision. We can provide an update at that point. And then we've got the September 28th meeting where we'll review financial reports. We'll have the unaudited actuals. And then the CROW team will provide an update on their field work, because that's the week that they'll be on site as well into the first week, actually through the 2-week time frame. They'll be completing some of their work related to 2019-20. So we've got that date. And then at the end of November, because again, as part of the role of the audit committee is to review that draft of the audit report for 19-20, they would be bringing that forward on November 30th. And then so that we can bring it forward to the board at the subsequent meeting. And then we've got the March meeting scheduled or planned here as noted for next year. Again, as needed, we may need to from time to time if there's an update that we need to bring forward from the CROW audit team. We'll bring that forward as well, but here's our proposed schedule for the next year.
Thank you. Are there any questions about the calendar, the draft? Are we good with this? Do you gentlemen feel you'll be able to attend on these dates? Set them aside on your calendar?
I will.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. I love the commitment because it's important. And I want to thank Dr. Stockpile for scheduling these and the flexible of adding the dates because I feel it's very necessary. So thank you very much for that. And so everybody's good with the dates and you can go ahead and put them, if you could put them on the calendar so we all have them kind of reserved on our outlooks or whatever and we don't lose track of it. All right, so now we're going to do a round for the committee members to offer any comments that they have for today. Mr. Torres, would you like to start us off?
If I may, I just want to thank Dr. Salkeld and her staff and the auditors for all the hard work that they do. I mean, it's commendable, and especially now during this COVID pandemic, it's Herculean, you know, because I've been there. And so I just want to commend them for all their hard work and thank you all for indulging me during these meetings. So look forward to talking to you in August.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Torres. We appreciate your involvement and your volunteering for this because it's so important. Mr. Gutowski.
Accolades to the district and then also to staff for bringing on a culture and enhancing it of transparency and the steps that are being taken in order to do that. It's money well spent for the citizens and taxpayers and our students. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Gutowski. Mr. Solis.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to echo those sentiments. Yeah, thank you for all the hard work, and we look forward to moving ahead and making things right. So thank you.
And Dr. Aguirre, I see you've would you like to make a comment as well?
Yes, so I'd just like to echo the comments around accolades to Dr. Sawkeld and her team. It's been a lot of work in a short period of time, and add to that the fact they had to do it from home because they didn't have access to their office space. So I just accolades all around. And I want to thank members of the committee. It's an important check and balance in our system, and the ability to have citizens ask, us as staff, those difficult questions. We welcome that. I know sometimes we want to say, and there's a back and forth, but that's the way it works. That's the way it's meant to work. As long as we can understand we're doing it for the best interest of the district, I think that's exactly the way our system was meant to work. So I want to thank members of the committee. I want to recognize the work happening on Dr. Sawkeld's and with her team. Recognize the work going on by our internal auditors. Again, you mentioned the fact there's only 2 and all the work that they've been able to do within that limited staff. So just, it's a note of appreciation on my end for everybody, and make sure you keep safe. Obviously in our communities down the South Bay, COVID-19 is very strong. So want to make sure everybody stays safe out there, wear those face coverings and take good care.
Yes. Thank you all. I want to echo everyone's remarks because I appreciate not only the community members and the time they spend going through the agenda, asking good questions, being patient when we may not be able to address all the things they're bringing up at that point in time, but I do too feel like we've started a new day. The minute Dr. Sawkeld came on board, we really started doing the work of making our district be accountable and be in a framework of real checks and balances and policies and procedures that are standard, industry standard, and best practices. So I want to thank and recognize her team for that and everyone's good work. And I want to recognize Dr. Aguirre for also bringing in and the climate of cooperation is really key and clearly moving us forward. So we appreciate that. And with that, I will move to adjourn. Somebody want to move to adjourn our meeting?
So moved.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, everybody in agreement? We'll
Oh, yeah.
see you next time, next month, August 17th.
All right.